Hello, everyone. This is Danielle Bagg-Weyerman, the Senior Director of Impact at CHIP. Today, I'm going to be training you on the Coordinated Entry Data Standards. This training is intended for Coordinated Entry Assessors in Indianapolis. This is a required training for all Coordinated Entry Assessors. Today, we will be going over briefly the 2020 data standards, specifically as they are related to coordinated entry. We will be talking about a crisis needs assessment and this new tool that has been built into our coordinated entry workflow. We will do a little bit of training on our prioritization status. So some of you may have been familiar with this. That has popped up on the VI-SPDAT a few months back, but we haven't been utilizing it as a community. We're also going to talk about current living situation, and I'm going to give you a sneak peek of something exciting that is coming soon. So the data standards, this is a HUD guidance of our data standards. Typically gets updated once a year. It was actually supposed to go into effect April 1st, but because of COVID, they delayed it until October 1st. So the data standards is a pretty thick document, and I can actually send it out to everybody. But there are a few parts that specifically call out coordinated entry. So some notable things is the data standards really define coordinated entry events and coordinated entry elements, data points that we must collect. As a COC, we're required to collect these data elements for our coordinated entry system. Now, these data standards are really paving the way for the future and what our outcomes and performance and kind of tracking as a community, some reporting that will be required starting next year. So this is trying to get all of the COCs collecting the same data points when it comes to coordinated entry so we can all report in the same fashion. So an important part to call out in the data standards is this distinguishment between a crisis needs assessment and a housing needs assessment. So when we think about what we have been using coordinated entry for from 2017 until now, we've really been focusing on this housing needs assessment. So the whole purpose of that is to gauge somebody's assessment for their housing needs and to be able to prioritize them for our housing resources. The data standards really calls out this crisis needs assessment, and I think if we think back to our system vision, there's really this component of this triage and understanding somebody's crisis needs when they come into our system. And so we have built out this crisis needs assessment as part of our coordinated entry workflow. We're going to go through HMIS and do a little screen sharing so you can see how this tool looks. But really, regardless of if you're doing a crisis needs assessment or the housing needs assessment, HUD is requiring that we have a date, a location, a type, so whether this is phone, virtual, or in person, the level, so whether that's the crisis needs assessment or the housing needs assessment, the result of that assessment, and then our prioritization status. And we're going to also call out a little bit more about this prioritization status and how we should be utilizing that in our community. We're also going to talk about the current living situation. So this is also called out in the data standards. They specifically talk about coordinated entry, but they also talk about things like street outreach or our emergency shelters and how we should be utilizing this feature. So this was added to our coordinated entry work group a few months ago, and we're really trying to utilize this. But as of October 1st, we are required to start using current living situation. So for coordinated entry projects, you must record a current living situation anytime one of the following occurs. So a coordinated entry assessment, so when they come into our system, we need to make sure we're updating our current living situation, which that'll now be part of the workflow, so you will have no other option. Or anytime a coordinated entry event is recorded. So these are things like referrals. So anytime a referral is made, we are going to have to make sure that the current living situation is getting updated at the same time. The client's living situation has changed, so if they were unsheltered and now they're sheltered, or vice versa, or maybe they've doubled up, that should trigger a current living situation being updated in the system. Or if a current living situation has not been recorded for longer than a community-defined length of time. So this really parallels really well with our auto exit policy, which is 90 days. So if somebody doesn't have a coordinated entry service logged for 90 days or longer, they will be auto exited from our system. And so current living situation and logging that service can all be done at the same time so that we can make sure we're compliant. I am going to pop over now to do a little bit of our screen sharing before we go back to our PowerPoint and share the upcoming exciting news. So let me do a new share for client track. Okay, I'm going to start a new client. This fake client has already been enrolled in coordinate entry, so I'm going to add a new client. I'm going to go to the coordinate entry intake, add new client. I'm going to show you two different versions. So one is going to be for a youth household. So that would be the head of household is under the age of 25. And I'm also going to show you one for a non-youth household, so a household that's over age 25. So we will just create a name here. John Smith, put some numbers in here. And we are going to make this person older than 25. So they are not a youth. We're just going to fill some of this stuff out as we go. And this should look very familiar to you. I'm not going to go through the whole workflow because I'm only really going to show you the crisis needs assessment and what that looks like. But it's going to all start out the same. So client signature and the assessor's signature. And then again, family members. Then you're going to get to this program eligibility or program enrollment screen. You're going to select coordinated entry and select the person that is going to be in the household. Then you will get to the program, the universal data assessment. So again, you'll fill this out. I'm going to say he's a place not meant for human habitation. He's been there for a while. Pick a date, time, and 1 in 12 months. And no insurance. Okay, so right after the universal data assessment is where you're going to find the triage assessment. So this is our crisis needs assessment. Now, for a household that's not a youth, it's going to ask assessment location. So it'll probably pre-populate with coordinated entry since that'll be your organization. I really actually should have plugged in as that instead of CHIP. It's going to ask the assessment contact type, so phone, virtual, or in person. I'm going to say this was a phone. It automatically fills out that this is a household without children because no minor children were part of the enrollment. Verified by project, I'm going to say coordinate entry. Current living situation, so we said this person was a place not meant for human habitation. Now here's an important part that I need you to pay attention to. After you do this current living situation, you want to come down here where it says record contact. So if you check that box, it's going to have a service. So it allows us to log the CES client contact service. This service will take place, or will keep the person enrolled in coordinate entry and for at least 90 days. This counts towards our auto exit services. So you will not have to log another service. So you want, anytime you update the current living situation, which again, this is pretty similar. The triage assessment is really built around this current living assessment. You will want to hit record contact and then put client contact in there. Then it's going to ask prioritization status. So this is the part that is going to be a little bit new for us. Because this person is literally homeless, they're in a place not meant for habitation. I know I am going to place them on the prioritization list because they are literally homeless and they need a housing resource. So I'm going to say placed on prioritization list. You'll notice that the diversion screening that we used to have as part of the workflow is no longer there. This has essentially replaced that. So if Mr. Smith had said that he was doubled up, for instance, we can go back up here, say he was staying with family. It's going to ask you a series of questions of if they're losing their housing or not. And they say he's not going to lose his housing. To me, that is a big red flag that this guy does not need to go all the way through to the housing needs assessment. He doesn't need to be placed on the prioritization list because he's not literally homeless. He's not going to get one of our resources. So therefore, I would go down here and put not placed on prioritization list. But for the sake of this guy, I'm going to say place not meant for human habitation, placed on prioritization list. Once you hit save, it's just going to go through the rest of the coordinate entry workflow. If we did have an instance where the person was not literally homeless, and this was kind of our screening to know, okay, maybe we want to connect you with a diversion program, but you don't need to go into the full housing needs assessment, then I would just hit this workflow, hit the X, and cancel the workflow. And what that does, they'll still show up in the pool, but they won't have a VI SPDAT score. They won't have a length of time homeless. And we will also select no, not placed on the prioritization list, which will tell Lisa at CHIP not to make a housing referral. So hopefully that makes sense. So from there, like we mentioned in the data standards, the current living situation. So I want to talk about how we would fill that out. So say a few days have passed, John calls me back up, and he was homeless at the time, but now he's not homeless. He's in a hotel, whatever it might be. Or I'm on outreach now and I see him on outreach. I'm going to go to this current living situation. And you will see the one from our assessment is there, but we can always add a new one. The enrollment will be the coordinated entry. We can say verified by coordinated entry. Current living situation, we can update that. So now maybe let's pick out something else. John, he's decided to go to the safe haven. So now he's at the safe haven. So I'm going to select that. I'm also going to record a contact because that will update our 90 days for our services. So then he will be good for 90 days. And I am going to hit save. So again, that should be happening every time the client moves to a different living situation, at least every 90 days, or anytime there's some kind of coordinated entry assessment or event that happens. So as we're in case conferencing, when we bring people up, hopefully the coordinated entry team will be asking, where's this person currently staying? We want to see this get updated more often. And even there is a column in the prioritization list that will list where somebody's current living situation is. This is really going to help us when it comes to prioritization and when it helps us with pool cleanup and realizing who really does need to be in our system and who doesn't. Okay, now I said I was going to do the crisis needs assessment for a youth household. So YHDP is about to kick off October 1st. October 1st is a very exciting day. And so with that, the youth and young adult work groups have come up with a triage assessment that's going to help match youth and young adults to the new program models that we have within our system. So eventually there will be host homes, there will be a diversion program for youth and young adults. There's a system-wide navigation. There are a lot of new programs. There's also rapid rehousing and TH to RH that are coming from YHDP. So it's really important that we have a way to be able to match youth and young adults to those resources, and we're using the crisis needs assessment to help do that. So I'm going to do a new coordinated entry, and I'm going to add a new client. I'm going to add, I'm not very good at names. I'm going to just say Fred Johnson. Fred Johnson was born 2000. So Mr. Fred Johnson is not a veteran. Again, it's going to look pretty similar. You go through the basic part. We're going to sign the consent. Hopefully your signature is a little more legible than mine. Project into coordinate entry, select Fred. And we can say where Fred is. We're going to say Fred is in a shelter. Been there more than a week. All right, so we will get again to this crisis needs assessment. So it's going to look a little bit different as we fill this out. So the top part's going to look the same. Current living situation, I said he was in shelter. So when I select shelter, you're going to see some other options that show up here because he is a youth and or a young adult, and we have a project to match him to. So I'm not going to go into the super weeds into this because that kind of comes to our next thing, which is our coming soon. But for the time being, we don't have the host home project is not up and running, and the diversion program is not up and running. So we don't have that to offer currently, but we will soon. But if we put in that they're in a shelter or unsheltered or a safe haven, it's going to ask, are you interested in being referred to a host home project? Yes or no. So if I selected yes, it's going to recommend that I refer them to the host home and I complete a housing needs assessment. That's because host home is really going to play this crisis housing kind of role in our system, much like shelter, but more specifically for youth and young adults. If I select something else up here, let me try to clear these out. If I select that he is staying with a friend, it's going to ask, do you have to leave within the next 14 days? I'm going to say yes. He's not identified other housing. He doesn't have any resources. He has not had a lease, and he has moved in the last 60 days 2 or more times. Then it's going to ask, have you ever stayed in shelter or unsheltered situation in the last 30 days? So if I select yes, that's also going to indicate that we should go to potentially a crisis or the host homes, because again, they've had literal homelessness in the last 30 days. So we want to make sure they're connected to the appropriate resource, and host home would be a great one. But if I say no, it'll ask, will I be losing housing in the next 30 days? If I say yes, it's going to then tell me if there were a program that could help you stay where you're currently staying while working on identifying permanent housing option, would that interest you? And if I select yes to that, that's going to tell me it would be a good candidate for diversion. So they're not literally homeless. They haven't lost their housing yet, but they will be soon. Diversion could be a really great program for them. But if they're not interested in diversion, we're going to refer them to a housing needs assessment. The resources for the youth and young adults in our system with YHDP, they do allow youth that are at risk for homeless to get referred to those programs. So that's why we would still do a housing needs assessment, even though they are currently doubled up, because they could still get matched to one of those programs. But obviously, if diversion will work, we'd love to go with diversion and keep them from ever becoming literally homeless. And again, prioritization status. So this person, we are going to refer to housing needs assessment, so we will place them on the prioritization list, because we want to get them matched up to rapid rehousing or THRH or one of the other permanent housing projects in our system. And also, don't forget to record a contact. And then I'm going to cancel this, but for the sake of it, if I was actually going to complete the housing needs assessment, I would continue on through. And then you will see right here that it has logged that coordinate entry service, so we will know that they will be in this system and not be auto exited for 90 days. The other thing I want to point out when it comes to these coordinated entry elements that are required in the data standards is on the VI SPDAT. So I'm not going to do this through the workflow. I'm just going to do outside. But when you're doing a VI SPDAT, regardless of which option, please make sure that you're filling this stuff out up at the top in order for us to be compliant with those data standards. So you need to select the Indy coordinate entry, the contact type. We need to know if it's phone, virtual, or in person. The location, please select that. And then you will notice at the bottom, prioritization status is on there as well. If you're completing a VI SPDAT and you're going to go off and select one of our housing programs, so rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, DASH, any of those, then you will want to say, yes, I'm placing them on the prioritization list. If you select, no, I'm not placing them on the prioritization list, then they will probably not ever get matched to housing. So please make sure if you want them to get matched to housing, we select that. And then you will notice if we did a different version of the VI SPDAT, so say we just did a singles, it might look a little bit different, but again, we want to fill out all these questions that are up at the top. We will try to make them required so you can't skip them. And then prioritization list, you want to fill out that as well. So let me go back to my PowerPoint and share some exciting news with you all. So I mentioned coming soon. So coming soon is a youth-specific access point. So this, any household that is head of household is under 25, so it could be even potentially minor, so 16, 14, up to 24. If we will be having a specific youth access point with 2 dedicated system navigators that will take care of all of their needs. And so I'm not going to let everyone panic right now. I will let you know this coming soon. We don't have all the details right now, but there will be some really robust communication around if you're working with somebody who is a youth or young adult, how to connect them to that access point. There's also going to be a youth-specific case conferencing that is rolling out beginning this week on the 1st. So that's exciting. If you have questions, I guess in the meantime, if you have a youth or young adult, continue to assess them. Like I said, host homes and diversion is not up and running yet, so just continue to do go through the workflow and connect them to the housing needs assessment as you normally would. But if you have questions, you can reach out to myself, Danielle Bag-Wireman. I put the CES at chipindy.org email address on there because that's probably the best way to get a hold of the coordinate entry team. You most likely will interact with Lisa, but shoot that email message if you have any questions about any of these new features. If something's not showing up that you think should, email CES at chipindy. That is all. So again, reach out if you have any questions. We are really excited to see our system become more dynamic and to have some reports that get built out with us to see how we're doing compared to other agencies and other COCs. Have a great day, everyone.